All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first meeting for the Microplastics Subcommittee. My name is Shelley Moore, and I will get the meeting kicked off. And then I'm going to start by giving a short presentation. And let me share my screen, and I will talk about what we are going to do for this meeting. So let me bring up the presentation. Here. There we go. All right. There we go. So again, my name is Shelley Moore. I'm the chair of the Trash Monitoring Workgroup. This committee, the Microplastics Subcommittee, was just voted on at the last Trash Monitoring Workgroup meeting. And I'll give you a little bit of history and how we kind of came about. First, let me start by saying what our agenda is. We've got 2 hours, and we'll stick to the schedule as much as we can. I'm going to give a brief introduction, and we're going to talk about coming up with some leadership for the Microplastics Subcommittee. And then we'll talk about kind of what our goals would be for this group. And we'll end by setting up the next meeting and talking about next steps. So the Water Quality Monitoring Council with the State Water Board was established back in 2007. And for some of you who haven't known about this group, they've been meeting for a long time, and they've got some very specific goals. Mostly it's around water quality and people working in the field of water quality, and bringing people together, getting them to collaborate, bringing data and information together to basically help with management decisions around the environment. And you can see who some of the members include for the Monitoring Council. And I will say for this particular subcommittee and any of the work groups, we don't want to limit participation to just those in California. So if you're outside of California participating in this meeting, we welcome you wholeheartedly, and thanks for attending. To give you an idea of how our group fits in with everybody else, we have the Water Monitoring Council, and then underneath that, we have a number of work groups related to water quality. And in particular, we've got the Trash Monitoring Work Group. And under the Trash Monitoring Work Group, we have some subcommittees. We have one on encampments, citizen science, data standardization and management, and microplastics is our new one. And if you're interested in joining any of these groups, please reach out to us. Here's a list of the current subcommittees for the Trash Monitoring Work Group and some of the leaders in each one of those. Feel free to get hold of me or any of these people, and we can get you started. Again, most recently, we started the Microplastics Subcommittee. So we've got a couple of vacancies, and we'll talk about getting some leadership in place for the Microplastics Subcommittee. And if you know of anybody who has interest, or if you have interest in participating in the citizen science group, please let me know. The goals for the Trash Monitoring Work Group and subcommittees are listed here. I'm not going to read them all, but basically it's bringing together all the stakeholders around trash, looking to work together and to inform people of what they're doing in the state and elsewhere. We know that many people go off and perform assessments of trash in the environment, and many times it's done in a particular area, and that data sometimes isn't shared, or people aren't made aware of it. This is the group that we want to encourage people to share what they're doing, and also help to provide information to the Water Quality Monitoring Council, the State Water Board, as they're looking to make decisions around the environment, particularly when it comes to trash monitoring. If you haven't visited our website, please do so. We've got a shortened URL down here, and you can find any of the information I've just presented on this website. And feel free again to reach out to any of us that are participating in this meeting today to ask questions. Many people are participating in a number of work groups. So that's it for my brief introduction. What I want to talk about now is passing the baton over to some different people and coming up with some leaders for this group. I have been talking with some different people, and I actually have some volunteers to lead up this subcommittee, and they are as follows: Scott Kaufman with the State Water Resources Control Board, and Monica Renzo with with the Desert Research Institute. And I'm sorry if I butchered your name. I would ask the group at this point if there's anybody else who would be interested in volunteering to co-chair this group, or if anybody wants to suggest someone to volunteer, please speak up now and let us know. Or you can also include a message in the chat. All right, so I will take silence as consensus, but I also want to make it official. So I've come up with a poll. I'm going to launch that poll. If you approve of Scott and Monica, please vote yes, or if for some reason you don't, go ahead and vote no. This is just to make it official. And I'll give you a few seconds to do that.
Shelley, before we finalize this, Shelley Walther in the chat has said that she'd be willing to help volunteer.
Awesome.
Scott Hudson as well said yes. I'm not sure if that is yes, they would like to volunteer or just agreeing in general.
Okay. Well, it looks like we've had pretty much unanimous or overwhelming consensus. And so what I'd like to do is welcome Scott and Monica also as our co-chairs for the Microplastics Subcommittee. And at this time, what I would like to do is pass off the baton to Scott. And from there, he's going to tell us a little bit about the State Water Board and some of their agency needs.
Thanks, Shelley. And before we get started on this, I just want to note that some people in the chat have also volunteered to help out with leadership. And I think once we get to the second half of this meeting where we're talking about what we actually want to do in this work group, there will be lots of opportunities for more leadership roles from volunteers. So we'll go ahead and get started with talking about what I see as work products that this subcommittee could work on in the near term, and then we'll open it up to getting your thoughts as the community and what we'd like to work on in the short term and the long term. So
That sounds great.
I'm sorry. Okay, cool. So I just want to start off with sort of like the big picture. So this is what I see as the agency monitoring goals for microplastics, both short term and long term. And this is sort of, I know it's really busy, but this is like the full answer as far as what I can see. So this includes the Ocean Protection Council, State Water Board, potentially additional agencies, but you could break it down into two major goals. One is characterizing the risk in the environment, and the other is figuring out how plastics are getting into the environment. And within those two main categories, you can break it up by different types of drivers as well as different types of applications. So for instance, for characterizing risk, we want to get an idea for the urgency for action for both the environment and human health. And in order to do that, we'll need to compare the monitoring data to risk-based thresholds, which we can do fairly reliably for the marine environment based on our information there. And it's not going to be as reliable for human health because there's a lot of uncertainties. Looking within the types of plastics that are most harmful will also be a monitoring goal. And so you can see that within those two types of monitoring goals, you may have different methods that could be used. If you're just trying to quantify the total particle count between different sizes, you might use a more simple method than if you're trying to figure out exactly how many of those particles are polyethylene terephthalate, for example, or however many are smaller than 5 microns, something like that. So you're going to need different instruments, different tools. For sources and pathways, you can also split this up into different drivers, such as getting an emissions inventory. This is going to drive where you're going to do monitoring and when you're going to do monitoring. Looking at stormwater, atmospheric deposition, wastewater, that's all going to depend on different environmental conditions and a targeted study plan. Whereas for source attribution, trying to figure out exactly which type of sources are going into the environment, whether they be from tires or agriculture, you're going to need a method that's actually able to attribute the sources back to where they came from. So for that, you may need a different type of instrumentation, not just Raman or IR. You might actually want to do some carbon isotope fingerprinting, for example, or non-target analysis. So this is sort of like the overall goal, and then I'll give you some more information in terms of what the short-term drivers are from the regulatory and policy point of view. So backing up a little bit, so if you were able to catch last week's National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine report out on the recent report reckoning with the US role in global ocean plastic waste, they are recommending to the federal legislature to develop a national coordinated monitoring network. And it was exciting to see San Francisco Estuary Institute listed on here, as well as California Coastal Commission, as those two organizations have already done a lot of research in California, are really leading the way, and as well as Heal the Bay, Surfrider Foundation, some other organizations that have really laid a lot of the groundwork for the federal coordinated monitoring network. And I think this work group can potentially serve as a driver or a hub for a lot of the research and the coordination on a national scale, not just in California, and could be a prototype for the type of monitoring network that we'd want to see moving forward on a national level. More on the local level in California, just want to make everyone aware of the legislative mandates that we have as state agencies to address microplastics. The first that I'll talk about is Senate Bill 1263. This has a requirement for the Ocean Protection Council to initiate a statewide microplastic strategy by the end of this year. OPC is going to be releasing this in the next few weeks, so keep a lookout for that. Caitlin Kalua, who I believe is on the call, will may be able to answer anyone's questions related to that. And included in the requirements are some of the drivers that I mentioned in the previous slide. So developing standardized methods, establishing baseline occurrence data, so just going out and doing some monitoring, but then getting it in a handle for how it's getting into the environment, the source reduction, sources and pathways. And in order to go back to the legislature with recommended source reduction strategies, we're going to need to know what those sources are. So using those more high resolution tools to figure out exactly where those plastics, those microplastics are actually derived from, whether it be tire wear particles or fibers from clothing, what have you. We also have Senate Bill 1422, which is working on a little bit of a shorter timescale than 1263 and is more narrowly focused on drinking water. So here we have requirements to monitor for microplastics in drinking water for 4 years, and consider adopting a health-based guidance level so that when consumers find out about how much microplastics might be in their drinking water, they know how to interpret this based on what the state of the science is. And this is, I think, both the communication as well as the monitoring and sampling are two aspects that this group could potentially have a subcommittee for or make a project for. The public communication, I think, is incredibly important, particularly for microplastics, because there is such a high level of awareness. And I think this is something that could extend beyond the drinking water effort into seafood consumption and other things related to our agency mandates. Also, we have a requirement to accredit laboratories. Some of the people on this call might work for a laboratory that is going up for accreditation. So we may also want to include a subcommittee or a group to help laboratories get on board and be able to get going with microplastics analysis in a harmonized and reproducible way. The other thing with microplastics research, as you probably are all aware, it's rapidly developing. And the methods that we're using today might not be the methods that we're using in 5 years. So this committee can serve as a way to, a platform for the dissemination of information for upcoming standardized methods or novel methods, and be able to, we may be able to prepare for these upcoming methods and have a forum to maybe invite speakers that are developing some of these. This is just an overview of some of the methods that are currently available based on size. So a lot of these will look familiar to you. Ramen and FTIR, we already have standardized methods for. The State Water Board adopted or will be adopting soon next year for drinking water. But we're still working on standardizing additional methods for looking at smaller particles. So for instance, pyrolysis GCMS, there's an ASTM group that's working on that. Just going back to the types of methods that are going to be used for different types of targets or goals. Routine monitoring in the environment, this is likely to be using microscopy with some subsampling, FTIR and Raman. This can be done with relatively low cost considering relative to the other methods that are out there. Whereas looking at microplastics in drinking water, you may need a more complex instrument, a more expensive instrument that can get smaller particles that are relevant to human health. Whereas looking at the actual distributions of particles in the environment, you may need an even more expensive instrument that can use a focal plane array and characterize every single particle, whereas forensics and fingerprinting seems to be the most complex potential analysis that we'd want to do. I mentioned before that we have some idea about the health effects of human health and a greater idea for the human health or for the ecosystem health effects. If you're not already familiar, if you haven't already watched our report out from the workshop that we held earlier this year, I encourage you to go back and look at that. It was recorded from October. The Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, or SCWRP, collaborated with experts from around the world to examine the literature for human health effects and ecosystem health effects of microplastics, and made some recommendations to the state for developing water quality objectives for ecosystems and how to communicate the uncertainties related to human health for drinking water. This is sort of the overall confidence in these assessments. We asked the question to our experts in 2 different ways. For aquatic ecosystems, we asked them how confident they are in the current framework that we have for assessing risks, and their confidence in the analytical process that we have. And overall, they were high for both of these. And so we feel fairly confident that we can reliably assess risks for aquatic ecosystems. Some caveats in there is that a lot of the studies that are used to assess risk have some imperfections with them. We may want to talk about. And then for drinking water, we asked the question in a different way. And here we asked what type of regulatory level or non-regulatory level would be appropriate for adoption at the State Water Board based on the available evidence. And the overall consensus was that the State Water Board should not adopt any sort of regulatory level, like a public health goal or notification level. The science is just not there yet. For the ecotox hazard characterization, we used a species sensitivity distribution approach. Again, if you want to learn more about that, you can go look at the SCWRP workshop from October. And I'll talk just a little bit about the upcoming requirements for monitoring in drinking water. I'm sure a lot of you are curious about that. And we also held a board workshop on this on November 17th. It was recorded, so if you want to go back and watch that full presentation, hear the public comments, I can drop the link in the chat. But at this point, we are planning to adopt a 4-year plan starting in the spring. So February of March of next year, we'll be going back to the board with a proposal for adopting the plans. And it looks like some of the text got a little bit cut off. Sorry for that. But what the title says is two-phased monitoring approach in drinking water. And at this point, we are planning to take an iterative approach to assessing microplastics contamination in the source waters in California, as well as what may be in the treated drinking water. And this is really based on a combination of the method limitations, as well as the proficiency testing samples that are out there or currently aren't out there. So I'll be a little bit more specific. So right now, we feel confident that laboratories using our standardized protocols can get down to 20 micron particles, microplastics. For particles smaller than that, we don't feel comfortable that laboratories can accurately quantify those types of particles. That's not to say that some laboratories can't. We know that some laboratories absolutely do have the ability to do that reliably. However, we need some way of measuring that. And so we're working with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, to develop some proficiency testing samples that will allow us to assess whether laboratories are reliable in quantifying those smaller particles. So that's sort of the background. So for the first phase, we'll be looking mostly in source waters for drinking water, and it's mostly going to be surface waters. So not really focused on groundwater as much. And we're going to be trying to get an idea for the major sources for human consumption. So looking at the State Water Project and some other big surface waters are the sources of drinking water for large populations, and using these standardized methods for 20 microns and larger particles. Along the way, we would like to validate some surrogate methods that may give us some information about the potential contamination, but is not the full-blown method that requires, frankly, a lot of time, energy, and money. And so that could be a product that the subcommittee can focus on, is it's thinking about the surrogate methods, trying to flesh out which methods we want to focus on, and analyzing data if it's available. By phase 2, 2024-ish, we are hoping to have this proficiency testing samples online so that we can accredit laboratories for the smallest particles that they can analyze. We're hoping that this is around 1 to 5 microns, depending on the instrument. And for here, we're going to be looking at source waters and treated drinking water. So what's actually potentially reaching the consumer. And hopefully by then we'll have some surrogate methods that will allow us to determine which monitoring systems should be doing additional monitoring using these Raman and infrared methods. As mentioned before, we've got these standardized methods. SQUIRP was able to validate 2 methodologies through this interlaboratory validation process using infrared and Raman. And we had a total of 40 laboratories participating in this overall project. 26 of those laboratories were participating in the method validation for drinking water, for IR and Raman. And if you're interested in looking at those methods, the draft standardized methods are available on our website. We're hoping to finalize these by adoption time and in the spring, so February or March. But we don't anticipate that the methods are really going to change much. They may just be like slight changes based on some public comments. We're continuing the method development project with SQUIRP right now, and we're expecting additional data for 3 different matrices in the early spring. So ocean water, fish tissue, and sediment. Some of you on this call might be working on that project. I believe that SQUIRP will have a separate forum to discuss that data and how to untangle it, but there may be some overlap between that forum as well as this forum, especially once we start actually using these methods out in the environment. I mentioned before that we would like to have some surrogate methods. We've already sort of laid the groundwork and looked at the literature about and ranked sort of these methods for their suitability, their feasibility, and whether or not they can actually distinguish plastics. There's still more work to be done here. We do have a short list of turbidity, total organic carbon, and total suspended solids, those top 3, for the ones that we are anticipating that water systems can readily use. A lot of water systems already have those, so they're going to be collecting the data anyway. So we can very easily validate those through our required monitoring as part of Senate Bill 1422. But some of these other ones could be quite promising. They just might not be as prevalent in water systems. So some of you on this call might have access to these instruments or might be considering purchasing some of these instruments. This might be a good way to validate some of these surrogate methods. We can also talk about sampling procedures in this work group. We may want to have a breakout committee for that. Right now, there is one set of standardized methods for sampling microplastics from any type of water, high turbidity and low turbidity, which includes everything from drinking water to raw wastewater. And this method is the ASTM method that I know that CASA, who's on the call, some representatives from CASA on the call, have been working with SQUIRP to go out in the field and actually test it. And they've put together some really great resources that will be useful for anyone trying to use these methods. They put this is a slide sent by Jared Voskel, who I believe is on the call, just showing the method in action, using filters, stack sieves for collecting wastewater. And they CASA put together a really great video. I think would be a good resource for anyone that's considering doing that. And potentially through this work group, we can develop more training guidance or training videos, not just for wastewater, but how to tune this to different types of water systems. So how would one do this for drinking water versus wastewater, that sort of thing. I mentioned before that we will also be providing accreditation for laboratories through our environmental laboratory accreditation program. And that'll be starting summer of next year. Some of you on this call may already be preparing to get accredited, and we could also use this as an opportunity to share information and resources, help streamline the process, and lower the barrier of entry for labs to get ELAB accredited. So I put out a lot of information and the types of things that could be focused on in this work group, but I don't want that to be all inclusive. It's not all inclusive. There certainly could be a lot more goals, and this is the potential overall goal that for this work group that I'm putting forward. Again, it's not final, but I see this as a local and global community exchange of information and data for microplastics monitoring methods and tools. We may want to refine that and refine sort of our scope, but that's I believe a good starting point for our group today. And there's already a lot of precedent for data sharing in the microplastics research world. This realm has a lot of tools like OpenSpeci and Slop Ramen that are actively community-driven and open data are used for microplastics monitoring. We also have Tomex, which is a open toxicity database for microplastics. And we could be developing or contributing to these types of open data and open source platforms through this work group. We can also talk today about the desired meeting frequency. We may want to base this on the needs of the individual breakout groups, if we have breakout groups, but just to give you an idea of the other subcommittees within the monitoring work group, we have the encampments group that meets quarterly, and the data management group that meets monthly. They're a little bit more active. So we'll probably be in between those two in terms of frequency. Again, we might have breakout groups that want to meet more often or less often. This may also be a venue for funding. So something that is possible for this group to do is to submit proposals for projects through coordination of in-kind resources or going in together on mutual projects. So this could be a forum for that. And I think that's all I have for sort of laying the groundwork. Just wanted to kick off this meeting with some ideas from the agency perspective, but I'd like to really hear from the community and see what people are interested in. And I'll hand it back over to Shelley to sort of drive where we want to go with next for this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I did want to say that in the chat, there are a number of people who have volunteered to help. And what I would tell you guys is that we will definitely be reaching out to you. And thank you for volunteering. I guess what I would ask is, Scott brought up a lot of different topics for potential goals and directions for this group to go in. I guess I would like to hear from this group as would Scott and Monica, as far as what do you guys perceive the goals are, and do you have any ideas that you would like to focus on?
Yeah, thanks, Shelley. And thanks, Scott, for that wonderful introduction. I'm really excited to be able to be a part of this and hopefully help steer the ship in some directions. I had an opportunity to think a little bit about, Scott and I had talked about some ideas, and one of the things I would really love to see is a sharing and information exchange, but with a focus being on allowing a variety of voices to be heard in this forum. I think that would be really great and would be really a wonderful opportunity to get diverse scientific diversity, as well, diversity of thoughts, and maybe career diversity as well, as an opportunity to share and exchange information across all parts of our science. And I'm really glad that, Scott, you ended on talking about training, because I was also thinking along those lines. And one thought that did come to my mind as well is, how do we ensure that the trainings we do think about can be accessible and sort of inclusive for different people and different backgrounds and things. So those two ideas that did pop into my head of things that I thought would be directions to go in. And then I know that there's the trash assessment playbook. And so is there something, a direction we can go with that? I know I personally have already used the trash assessment playbook, so perhaps there's opportunities there as well. So those are just some of my ideas of having thought a little bit about this ahead of the meeting.
Great, thank you for the input. Anybody else want to speak up?
Hi, this is Shelley Walter.
Hi, Shelley.
Hi, Shelley. I would love to have some discussion about study design and statistics, sample representation, that kind of thing. Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I would love to have can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'd love to have a discussion on study design, requirements, or recommendations. A lot of microplastic studies have been plagued with issues regarding sample representation, and it'd be great to kind of have a forum to discuss, major issues with past studies and what recommendations going forward.
That sounds great. So the concept of doing some sort of microplastics playbook has come up a lot, and that would involve, I think, including study design, things such as study design, also the methods themselves, and I think that might be a great project for this group to focus on initially. Is putting together some sort of playbook revolving around the different methods used for analyzing microplastics. Does anybody else have any ideas of what might go into that playbook as well?
I'm not sure if this is something aligned with the objective of the subcommittee, but is there any interest in thinking about treatment methods for microplastic? Because I've been seeing a lot of studies coming up with treating microplastic from marine sediments, from wastewater. I know there's a lot of studies on treating microplastic from wastewater because of the sheer amount of microplastics in wastewater. So is there any interest in moving towards that direction in this subcommittee?
Yeah, Scott, I would ask for your input on this one.
I think that'd be useful. We could certainly I think we could organize this. Once we get our organization set, then I think there'll be a place for a lot of different topics in there, and that might not be part of a playbook, but it might be part of another project that we produce. Maybe that would be a website or something like that. That's a great idea.
All right.
Hi, Shelley. Hi. This is Andrea
Hi.
De Lapa from the Council for Watershed Health. I was thinking also if in the playbook, and maybe it can be included as an appendix. I will be interested in trying to find ways to involve community-based projects for using volunteers or youth or schools to help in water sampling. However, I'm well aware of the fact that the less expert you are in the microplastic collection and the more opportunity you give for water contamination. So I think that definitely, I speak for my NGO, but I'm sure that there are a lot of NGO out there that would like to involve volunteers of developing community-based project to help with that.
That's a great idea, and I could see us putting something in the playbook similar to what we did with the trash monitoring playbook, as far as having different tiers and different levels. I think, Scott, you've already been talking about some different tiered methods. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. For the tier methods, right now we have a conceptual plan for 3 tiers. So the first tier would be something that is incredibly inexpensive or already available in water systems. So water systems are, a lot of them already have particle counters, or they're looking at total suspended solids, total organic carbon, that sort of thing. There's been some studies in the literature that indicate some of those surrogates are highly correlated with microplastics content, even though they're not necessarily only looking for microplastics or only detecting that. And the second tier, so once, I guess in order to feel comfortable that those tiers are useful, first we need to pair that monitoring data with actual microplastics monitoring data. And within some margin of error, we could determine sort of a threshold where we'd say, okay, above this or below this level, we don't think that you have any problem with microplastics. It's unlikely that you have a problem. We don't recommend that you do any more monitoring. Above that level, we recommend you do potentially tier 2, which at this point we're thinking would be just looking at the total mass of microplastics using pyrolysis GCMS. That's theoretical as well because we don't have any standardized methods for that, but we will within the next year. So ASTM will be finalizing a pyrolysis GCMS method very soon. And the tier 3 would be the most expensive method, which is currently our only standardized method using Raman or infrared spectroscopy.
Yeah, and part of the reason I brought that up is because I think the tiered methods could provide a way for different levels of people to participate in doing microplastics research. So that would include citizen scientists all the way up to your more complex needs for different stakeholders. So I think that is a good idea for putting into the method playbook. Does anybody else have any other comments?
I do. Hi, I'm Terry Slivko at Metropolitan Water District. Thanks, Shelley. Thanks, Scott and Monica. Great first meeting. It's really impressive about the number of people that are on here. 173 participants. Wow. So the first thing that I was thinking about is what are the interests from everybody in this subcommittee? It's a huge subcommittee potentially, and what is it that you're looking for? What can you contribute, and so forth. So I think maybe a survey might be helpful, so that we can gauge who the go-to people are for a certain subject or expertise, and so forth. There are a couple of things that showed up in the chat and during the discussion that I really liked a lot, and I just wanted to support it. So one of them is a workshop or a symposium or further discussions where it's topic specific on GC pyrolysis and other analytical tools that we think are going to come up sooner rather than later for use for monitoring any matrix. and also sample collection. Sample collection and the inter and intra-laboratory validation of sample collection, I think, is important. It's going to be a little tricky depending on what you're taking, where you're taking your sample and what type of matrix you're taking it in. So I think that this warrants a whole group of different types of scientists, and in order to really get the methods tweaked for each matrix and each intended, sample. And then the second thing I really liked okay, this is a really great group of people. And as the state moves forward and through developing the microplastics monitoring plan for ambient and ocean and also drinking water, this group of people could serve as a peer review function. And so that's why I like the idea of some type of survey. And if we have experts here or people that will be willing to review data, review reports, review and provide comments and serve as that peer review step that's so important moving forward. I think that would be really wonderful.
Yeah, that's a great idea on the survey. And what I will do is Scott and Monica, perhaps three of us can get together and create a survey to send out to all the participants that are on this meeting today. Thank you, Teresa. Suzanne, did you have something to say?
Yeah, just a quick comment, and this may be opening a bit of a Pandora's box, but we're talking about microplastics, and I realize this is the Microplastics Subcommittee, but as someone who is out there looking in samples for microplastics, so much of what we find doesn't necessarily fit neatly into that definition. And how much do we want to explore kind of the microparticle issue versus just the microplastic issue? And I know California's definition is pretty broad. It includes a lot of those things. But just thinking about recent publications that have come out, the Athenian Erdl publication about how a lot of studies are finding 50, 60%, anthropogenically modified cotton, that sort of thing. How much do we want to think about those other sources that, in terms of thinking about things like food dilution, for example, does that cause potentially just as much of an issue when a cotton fiber gets into the stomach of an organism versus a polyester fiber? How does that fit into this sort of bigger picture, and how much does the group want to think on that is my kind of comment. And I realize that's a big chunk to bite off, but wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, thank you for doing that. That is a big chunk to bite off. There's been a ton of discussion around the issue, and I think this is a great group to bring this up with. And I guess I would ask, is there anybody else who has any comments regarding that issue?
I'll just say that I think that's it would neatly fit inside this work group, because we are already thinking about relative hazards of different particle types. And just because the State Water Board definition excludes entirely natural polymers that haven't been modified doesn't mean that we're not going to find them in samples. And we need to know if we should be looking for those. The definition that we've adopted is, it can be amended if we believe that it's necessary, which means including more or excluding more. And there is no harmonized definition for microplastics yet, and I think we should keep that in mind as we move forward.
Yeah. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, this is Usha Vedagiri, and I have a somewhat similar question. This is a great group, great plan. It sounds really good. I was thinking along the lines of other kinds of particles. Nanoplastics is another obvious category where I think Lab studies may be able to focus on effects and analytical methods for microplastics, but when you go in the field, you don't know whether the effects, if any, that you're seeing are strictly due to microplastics or nanoplastics as well. And so I guess what I'm throwing out there is, would this group right now plan to stop with an acknowledgement of those unknowns, but not have the bandwidth to go and try to answer every question for everybody? Or are those other topics like other types of particles and other sizes of plastics, is that also within the scope of this group?
I would say that fits within the scope. So the definition of microplastics that the State Water Board adopted includes nanoplastics. So one nanometer up to 5 millimeters. And there's going to be a lot more uncertainties with the particles more than 1 micron, simply because we can't detect them reliably. But I think keeping that in mind in this work group is definitely something useful. And this may, once we get an idea for how we're actually going to accomplish this work and organize it, I think that each of these items will find a place within that organization.
Okay, so keep it on the table, so to speak. Yeah, I agree. Sounds good.
So if anyone wants to talk, go ahead and just unmute yourself and don't feel shy. You can also use the chat too. A lot of people have been using that. That's great.
This is Shutopa Ghoshal from CDPA. And regarding the nanoplastics, I know there is a lot of interest in actually trying to identify or analyze them. But given the size of it, it's rather difficult given our analytical techniques. But essentially, once you know that there are microplastics in the environment, in the oceans, you can be taken for granted that you will have nanoplastics because things are breaking down and becoming smaller and smaller. So if you detect a microplastic particle of, say, polyester, then you can practically assume that eventually, not at the exact moment, but going forward, there would be nanoplastic of polyester. So spending a whole lot of time trying to address the nanoplastic problem may not be as necessary as identifying the different types of microplastics that we experience in the environment. That's what I want.
That was a great point, Sutapa.
This is Bhaskar Joshi from Caltrans. I had a question, I would say. Right now, the state board requires trapping particles up to 5 millimeters by installing full trash capture devices. So anything that passes those screens is where we should be sampling instead of sampling anywhere. And then the other thing is this group also going to think about what do we do? After we know all this information from sampling, are we going to look at how are we going to solve the problem? Is there a treatment that will work, or will this yield information in that regard?
Great points. So I mentioned before, we have a framework for going back to the legislature by 2026. So the Ocean Protection Council has this legislative mandate to go back to the legislature with recommendations for source reduction strategies. And I think this work group could play a pivotal role in assessing the different types of solutions that are out there, getting some dialogue that's useful for the Ocean Protection Council Caitlin Kalua, who I believe is on the call, may be able to provide a little bit more information about where they are in terms of their draft strategic plan. It's going to be open for public comment within the next month, and I encourage everyone here to read it and provide some feedback. And this group may help implement a lot of the research and science needs to allow the legislature to make those meaningful actions, and as well as other regulatory agencies.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Scott. I'll jump in really briefly. No, I think there's, quite frankly, ample opportunity. Right now, the document that will be shared publicly is looking at both the near-term solutions. Of course, we're looking at, quite frankly, the macroplastic pollution that we know have multiple benefits for society that, ultimately fragment and do break down into microplastics. Kind of the aligning current state priorities, current state agency actions, identifying them as recommended short-term actions while we are still pursuing the science, as well as in a coordinated fashion between now and the December 31st, 2025 deadline to return to the legislature with those findings. Not saying everything has to be implemented, of course, by 2025, but to provide that constructive, again, the findings as well as next steps, both on the research side, as well as actual tangible, the future solutions that we don't necessarily have yet, that we quite frankly need to inform with further science. I think Scott in his presentation provide a great framework of what has been done. And quite frankly, and I think I can't speak for the legislature, of course, but I can only imagine having this bill that required this strategy in 2018 is now 3 years later, and we have a wealth more of literature and knowledge than we did 3 years ago. So I do want to acknowledge that level of advancement. And I think there's wonderful momentum that I'm excited about, and I know there's a lot of expertise, quite frankly, in this group of 173 people that I think over the course of the next year, I think we could do some great digging.
Thanks, Caitlin.
You brought up a great point about source control, and that is likely to be the best option, but very difficult to do because it has to be regulated. It has come from the regulatory side. And then this is not just an ocean problem. It's going to be, everybody's going to be regulated because whoever discharges will be regulated for microplastics. And that's why it's important to know what can we do about it. All this sampling will yield a lot of benefit, but ultimately it's, what do we do? Should it be regulation? Should it be treatment? Should it be some other thing? Thank you.
I have a comment. Shannon Simmers of the City of Redlands. I know that the EPA regulations for categorical dischargers shows plastics facilities is regulated as a point source, but not as non-point source. And I think that might be one change because, just because it's not going directly into a waterway, it's getting there inadvertently because it's passing through the treatment systems.
Thanks, Shannon. Just recording all of the notes here with the delay. So Leah, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just was, listening to all this conversation about, different source control and methods. This group might be really great for harmonization and coordination, just not within, measuring microplastics or doing toxicity work, but across those lines of thinking and bringing all of the different pieces of the puzzle together. I know that's really broad conceptually, but because we have such a big group and such diverse expertise, this could be a really great vehicle to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And what came to my mind as well when we were talking about this is the potential also to pull from the trash monitoring work group or these other work groups that are already in existence as well to really share that information, because it's not, we aren't working just in our own little bubble, right? There's all these communications between these different areas. So great point.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I think that goes beyond, just sharing information, but actually leveraging each other's work. So as someone who is starting to think more about, doing risk assessment for microplastics, I'm a toxicologist, but I need that exposure data to come from somewhere. So kind of thinking along those lines.
I think one of the benefits of the trash monitoring work group is that it connects scientists directly to the decision makers. And that's something that we definitely already have in this work group. We have a lot of representation from agencies as well as academics and the regulated community, NGOs. And so I think this is could potentially just be a great forum for having these important discussions that there might not otherwise be a general forum for this type of work.
Hi, this is Shelley Walther again. I just put something in the chat, but Scott, you and Suzanne Brander, had an excellent input in the recent DTSC meeting. And there was a lot of discussion about secondary versus primary microplastics. And they all agreed, everyone agreed that secondary is really where the biggest focus should be, but then just implementing something is easier for primary. So I'd like to see more work done, just getting a better handle on what trash, breaking down, how that's affecting levels of microplastics. And that'd be a great tie-in for, we're in the trash monitoring work group. So,
That's a great point, Shelley. And once we actually get some microplastics monitoring data, we can look at that data and compare it to the trash monitoring data. And I think there's a lot of insights that could happen from using these new data sets that we're going to be generating as part of this work.
This is Jared with CASA, and really appreciate the dialogue and in the chats as well. I know it's been mentioned, but just to kind of express our experiences and support, the method collection aspect of it. Our members were employing the ASTM method. We wanted to use a standardized method. There was a fair amount of troubleshooting we had to go through. The ASTM authors were very generous with their time, walking us through how we could potentially modify it to get it to work. And we did get it to work. I put a link to a video in the chat pertaining to that. But it was intensely time consuming and laborious. It's a 24-hour sample. If you're ever at a wastewater treatment plant, having to be in that environment for 24 hours, you wouldn't wish that upon anybody. I met a guy yesterday who lived literally at the plant for an entire year to help get a project launched on some nutrients management issue. But I kind of thought, well, one day at the plant, not too bad compared to 365 days. But I'll just say, if there are alternative means or less laborious means, that would be fantastic to identify. When I hear from our member agencies and their GMs, they're all wanting to get something that's accurate, but also simple. And that's that tension of, where are the trade-offs? And if we can find the sweet spot where you really can trust the results across the board, they're uniform, and it's easy to do, that would be ideal. And that's on the collection side of it. And then there's the analytical side. We're actively trying to collaborate and work with US EPA and some others, with SCORP, SFEI, OPC, State Water Board on doing some of this development work. And very excited about those interactions and where we're going to go in 2022 on it. But there's also the analytical side. And I think the pyrolysis offers a lot that is good in terms of an efficiency and an ease of use, maybe as a screening method. And then you could go off that mass reading to realize if you need to do other types of analytical methods to identify what the actual microplastics are and the real risk they pose. But we're trying to work on that as well, on those analytical methods, and help the folks who are doing the pyrolysis method. And they could use that in a lot of applications, which is really exciting. So I think you could do air samples, you could do biosolid samples, you could do water samples. So there's a lot of opportunity there, and we're actively involved in trying to collaborate to do that. So we're happy to have this group here and this forum, and we'll continue to participate and support your efforts.
Yeah, Scott and Monica, it seems like the group has a lot of interest in sample methods and design, and maybe that is something the group can start focusing on early on. Just a suggestion. Anybody else want to talk about their particular interests or needs?
Hi, Shelley. Yeah, it's me, Terry, again. So one of the things that I was, I commented on at the November 17th meeting where Scott presented the drinking water policy and monitoring, draft monitoring plan, was the need for potentially putting together an initial pilot study that would be able to give agencies time to set up the methods in their laboratories, and also to develop sampling protocols, because we don't have them. And even though we have this protocol, there are so many little things about sampling, and including accessibility and the location. And so this type of monitoring might be a little tricky, and you want to be able to compare, you know, apples to apples across the state for drinking water monitoring, right? So I'm curious, you know, if there's anybody on this in this call that would what their thoughts are about an initial monitoring phase, like before phase 1 starts, like an initial pilot study to get the methods set up. The sampling protocol is part of the method, right? And then the analytical method itself. One of the things I'm most concerned about is if I put, you know, my next budget cycle starts in July. So that means it's going to take me 8 months to get an instrument in here. And then it's going to be really difficult to get everything set up. And I can't even do a sampling and study because I don't have a microplastics method yet. So it just seems like the timing, we just really need some sort of a way that we could evaluate the methods first. The sampling protocols need to start. And so in order to do that, we need the method. So I'm just curious what everybody thinks about that. Do you think that you like the idea, or do you think it's maybe wasting time?
Personally, I really like the idea. I think that we should have some sort of pilot study, and I'm talking with my agency partners right now to figure out how we can do that. And if anyone on this call works for a water system, or maybe if they just have the resources to do some type of monitoring, now might be a good time to volunteer for being part of a pilot study. This could you know, be good for you as well as the community, develop guidance for sampling, and just get some practice.
Hi, Scott. Can you hear me? My name is Dan Hott.
Yeah.
Hi, I work for the U.S. Geological Survey here at the California Water Science Center. And we do have funding opportunities that come through. One that comes to mind, and so let me just back up. I work all over California, but in the California Bay and Delta predominantly as a suspended sediment transport scientist. And we have the priority ecosystem science funding that comes out here at the end of the month that usually is allowed to establish somewhere in the range of $100,000 to $200,000, and we're able to collaborate with internally and externally, and with you know, we can obviously take in funding and we can give out funding. And while we are usually it is competitive, it is something that we are always willing to collaborate on with people that may be able to establish a pilot project such as this. We also operate, over 30 gauging stations across the Delta and the Bay that captures many constituents in addition to flow. So these are some things that kind of get towards the idea of a flux of microplastics through the system. We have laboratories, and of course we work with all different water science centers across the state, across the country, excuse me. So there are some, getting outside of California, there are some opportunities too. So I just wanted to share that information and kind of start ideas.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Dan. Anyone want to respond to that or also express their interest in being part of the pilot project? So we've got a few people in the chat that are interested, but if anyone wants to speak up, go ahead, unmute.
Hey, Scott. This is Tiffany with Brown and Caldwell, and I'm interested. So in the policy handbook for microplastics, there's a provision that, some agencies could work together to do a shared sampling plan based on their surface water, shared source surface waters. And I think that that's, a really good option for flexibility, so agencies can collaborate and, pool their resources on some of those shared sources. Is there maybe an opportunity to marry, Teresa's idea of this initial phase 0 to, create that plan, maybe from a state leadership position to identify, the sources and the sample spots, and then include that as the phase 0 sort of monitoring?
Yeah, I love where you're going with this, Stephanie. We want to, I guess, a background for some people that are not totally familiar. We want to leverage resources as best we can for this initial microplastics monitoring, just based on the price of these methods and running these samples and the uncertainties of the human health effects. We are planning to get as much bang for our buck and monitor at strategic locations in California. So one of the provisions that we have in the policy handbook is we allow water systems to effectively identify sites that they believe are best representative. And that's a conversation that we could have through this breakout group in the short term. And the next 6 months, we could make that a high priority for this work group, make that a breakout group. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be just water systems and managers. We could also have anyone from the academic realm or otherwise that wants to get involved in those conversations. I think there's also some overlap with the aquatic environment and the sources, the fate and transport of microplastics in general, because if we're going to be monitoring in source waters that are used for drinking water, some of those are also aquatic ecosystems. And so this could be a really good opportunity to bring together interests for the aquatic environment, drinking water, and for multiple sectors.
I think the more you discussed it, the more it started to pull together the folks in this group in terms of, maybe Teresa's initial idea of that sort of initial sampling to buy more time for agencies to get their in-house labs prepared, maybe some of Dan's funding and sampling points, and, whoever else on the group has, I think there were some suggestions of citizen science and academics to have some sort of coordinated effort or state leadership or the subcommittee leadership on creating that initial plan for monitoring points and coordinating those initial samples would be really helpful.
That sounds like a plan. Dan, you still had your hand up. Did you want to add anything?
Sorry, I should have just took it down.
Anybody else have any comments or things they want to share? Sounds like we've got a lot of interest in many things, and particularly in the, again, in the sample collection and going into the sample analysis. Perhaps, Scott, we should move on to talking about some other things, like some of the next steps that are coming up, some of the things you proposed in your presentation. You want to go ahead and take that on?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, it sounds like this work group has a lot of goals, maybe more than we can take on in the short term, but it's good. That's good. We have short-term and long-term goals here, and at this point we just need to figure out how we're going to go about it and how to organize it. So one of the things we can do right now is determine what sort of meeting frequency we think is appropriate for this large group. Clearly having 173 people on all these calls is probably not going to work for every single meeting, but we may want to have another large group meeting at some point. And so I propose having this be quarterly for these big group meetings, and we can work offline between now and the next quarter to develop these breakout groups. I've been recording in the notes, sort of people's interest in these different items. So I'll be following up with those individuals after this meeting offline to figure out how we want to go about getting that work started in these breakout groups. But I think having the large group meetings at least quarterly to start off with would be useful. We could hear report outs from the breakout groups at those meetings. We could also have invited speakers to give talks about the research that they're working on, or implementation case studies that in which they've actually gone out and done monitoring or proposing to do monitoring, and have sort of that peer review aspect as mentioned earlier. And so what do people think? I guess we don't have a great way of gauging people's or counting thumbs here, but I guess if you think if quarterly is good, go ahead and put like a thumbs up, use the thumbs up feature. If you don't want quarterly, there's a no. Actually, there's a no. There is also a no button. So maybe we just use yes or a thumbs up or no. And I can look at the participants list to see. And if anyone has a different proposal, feel free to just unmute. Getting a lot of yeses. Have not seen any no's, so I'll take that as overall people are in favor of having large group meetings on a quarterly basis. So at the next meeting, I think it'd be good to start off with like a survey. We can do the survey between now and then offline and look at the results from that to determine the prioritized needs, how much interest there is in different subtopics, and identify the volunteer leads for each of those subtopics. Something we can do between now and then, and potentially invite a guest speaker for the next meeting. If anyone has any ideas for maybe someone in this group wants to volunteer to be a first guest speaker, it can be like a 15 or 20-minute presentation about the work you're doing related to microplastics monitoring, preferably here in California, but also anywhere. We're open to hearing about this work going on anywhere.
Hey, Scott, I would ask the group if they've got anybody in particular they want to hear from that we can reach out to.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I know that there's a lot of work happening in Europe right now. People might be following some of that. If there's any particular like topic that I think that anyone is interested in hearing about, just shout it out.
We could also just put that in the survey and then collect kind of names of, if you need more time to think about it.
That's a great idea.
We can just compile them and kind of work down the list or something like that.
I was going to ask if we can volunteer other people to do it, because there's certain things that I'd like to see.
That sounds good.
Yeah, let's do it.
What would you like to hear more about, Terry?
Sampling. So yeah, so like experiences from University of Toronto and their sampling apparatus, that this self-contained IM apparatus is very interesting. I know that there are a number of vendors that came forward. This is their opportunity to sort of, we can, you know, view what is available that we haven't considered yet. And so I think technology and innovation is really important. This is going to drive it forward for us. So if we don't have something yet, you know, and there's like people asking about it, they can make it happen. So I think that's really important. And also the surrogate monitoring. I'd like to hear more about people's experiences. There are a couple of publications where they looked at surrogates and in drinking water, and I think wastewater too, but I would like to get sort of like a collective. In fact, you know, my hope and dream would be a Gordon Research Conference type of venue where we could really look at all this preliminary data and sort of like pick it apart. Like this is where this is what I found, and you know, this is, and then expert from, you know, somebody knows something more about that. And this is a very unique opportunity to do information sharing. And so I really like it. I prefer to meet in person sometimes because I'm like that, but so I think something like that would be helpful too.
Yeah, Teresa, you bring up a good, go ahead.
I was just gonna say those are all great.
I was going to say, you bring up a good point, Teresa, and about particularly about the in-person meetings, and perhaps we can start having those sometime over the next year. What we were doing with the Trash Monitoring Workgroup is we would have every other meeting would be in Northern California and then Southern California, so we would alternate, and perhaps we can do that and still use virtual connections as a possibility as well. So what's next on the list, Scott? We got something else?
Well, it sounds like a lot. We've got a lot of people interested in sub projects, and maybe if anyone wants to go ahead and just volunteer to be a lead for a sub project, now could be a good time. You can unmute and introduce yourself, and then people will know who to contact. I believe we have everyone's email address, so we can handle that afterwards. Once we identify the leads, we can get you in touch with those people.
Have we listed all the sub projects somewhere?
We haven't, but it seems there. Sorry, I do have some notes that I'm taking, but I don't. It's not a comprehensive list. Right now, some of the subtopics are treatment methods for microplastics, citizen science sampling and analysis, sample collection, some guidance and training for that, atmospheric deposition, sampling in air, surrogate monitoring. I'm not sure if I mentioned that one.
So Scott, can you refresh our memory on what we're trying to do here? Because I think that you're asking us to sign up for certain subgroups, right?
Yeah, so maybe Shelley can provide like a little bit of information about the trash monitoring playbook. And I think that's a product that we could put together through this work group. Something like a living document that is open and accessible, that has organizes a lot of the information that we're talking about today. So I don't know, Shelley, if you want to just give like a little background about what the trash monitoring playbook looks like and how it's been developed, that might be helpful.
Yeah, so the trash monitoring playbook came out of a project that was done between 2017 and 2020. And the goal was basically to assess 4 different methods of trash monitoring methods in rivers and streams, and to do a comparison between those methods. The thought was that not every method was going to be appropriate for every person. So we looked at doing a tally method where we just counted the trash and categorized it. We did a volume method, which came out of the Bay Area with the BASMA group. And we just took the volume of all the trash in the area. And then we also did the visual rapid assessment, which was basically doing a quick visual look at the area and giving it a score between 1 and 12, with 12 being the trashiest and 1 being the least. And then we also flew a drone. We wanted to do some sort of novel method that we could explore. So we flew a drone to collect imagery, and then we compared all those methods and the data that we came up with. And we looked at things like how precise the method was, how accurate it was, and we also looked at things like how much resources did it take to perform the method. And we put all those methods and the comparisons in this playbook. And what that allows people to do is to go into this playbook and pick a method based on those kinds of things, the kind of information that they are looking to get, and based on how much C and precision they want or how many resources they have. For some people, boots on the ground mean staff time and lots of money, but others, they might be willing to put in a little bit more money up front to purchase the equipment, and perhaps the drone method would work better. So that's what's in the playbook, and I could see us doing something similar with the microplastics. Each one of those methods was considered a particular tier, and so the level of difficulty of doing the method was also included with that assessment as well. So that's what's in the playbook, Scott. I don't know if that's what you were looking for exactly, but yeah, I'll throw the link to the playbook in the chat as well.
Thanks, Shelley. Yeah, so we don't have to make it just like the trash monitoring playbook. We can use that format. We can take inspiration from that or from other types of documents or things. This might be a website. We might through this effort find that there's just so many topics that we're interested in that it just becomes a living resource that could be accomplished through like a Slack channel or actually a website where people can upload documents or edit documents, that sort of thing. There's a lot of different products that I think could come from this, but I think starting with the precedent of the trash monitoring playbook would be a good start.
This is Shutopa. I was wondering, do you know anyone who is doing air monitoring for plastics now? Any group?
I don't think that they're on this call, but I know of a group that was doing air monitoring 2 years ago down at CSU Long Beach. I want to say, Shelley, do you know anyone still doing that?
State Channel Islands was doing some work. Yeah, they were looking at indoor microplastics as well.
Would you give out that information? Because I was thinking that in air monitoring, one of the how would it be best to do air monitoring, and what size range would we be looking into in air monitoring? And air monitoring is one area where nanoplastics become more relevant because microplastics fall out fairly quickly. So that's something that if we are going to air monitoring, that's something we need to pay attention to figuring out. Because in terms of doing analysis, SEM analysis, where you can look at air samples, but the elemental identification may not work for a lot of the microplastics, but so that's something that one needs to figure out about, because we have a lot of information about microplastics in the sediments and water environment, but the air is one thing that we haven't approached much, and that's something that would be to focus on next.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sutapa. And air monitoring is one of the tentative priorities that we have in the draft monitoring plan through OPC. We need to figure out the contribution from air into the environment.
Yeah, so if you can start to figure out how to go about and how to do the analysis in which environment. Indoor air environment would be a great, because there are a lot of plastic materials in that environment, but outdoor that is more complicated, because and there the size of the particulate matter becomes much more interesting. I guess it gets into nanoplastics at that point.
Oh yeah, Suzanne had a great idea to invite someone like Janice Brainy to speak, someone who's got a lot of experience with the air monitoring.
Yeah, that would be great.
Sounds like we've got a nomination for a speaker.
And all these meetings are recorded, just like the trash monitoring workgroup meetings. So part of the product that we put together are these meetings, and having the invited speakers being able to go back and use those resources as needed, I think would be really useful.
All right. So I guess the next thing, Scott, would be to maybe come up with the next meeting date, a good time for getting together, and we'll get some products out there, the survey certainly, and we'll start hitting people up to be guest speakers as well. So given that it's quarterly, I guess that would put it maybe in March. Should we just send out a doodle poll for March, or do we want to go ahead and make it? It might be difficult to make it with over 100 people on here right now, so maybe we include that in a doodle poll and email.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Shelley. We'll send out a doodle poll to everyone who attended today's meeting and try and figure out the best time for, in March to meet. And between now and then, like I said, I'm going to be emailing the people that spoke up about their interest in different breakout topics, and try and find some potential guest speakers for the next meeting. I've written down some of the suggestions. So we've got the folks from ASTM, their sampling methods, Charles Wong from SQUIRP, folks from SQUIRP doing the research recommendations, Surrogate Monitoring, someone who's doing that, University of Toronto, sampling developers like Bob Andrews, and then Janice Brainy from Utah. So any other potential speakers anyone wants to throw out there?
I'd recommend Harry Allen for sample design.
Cool. Thanks, Shelley.
Ben Maurer from NREL also volunteered in the chat to talk about a new project they're doing.
Oh, fantastic. And oh yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Nope, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd love to learn more about the Water Pact project. Maybe Ben, if you want to just unmute and just give us like just a short description of what that is.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Scott. And apologies, I had to join late. So if any of this is out of context or redundant, yeah, my bad. But yeah, we're just launching what we hope will be a multi-year project. It starts with an assessment phase where we're going out into 5 rivers and trying to do a broad spectrum collection and analysis of plastics. So that's size, shape, chemistry, and associated leachates. So we'll be taking bottle samples and processing those for nanoplastics and leachates as well. And we're looking at the Delaware, the Mississippi, the LA, the Sacramento, San Joaquin, San Francisco Bay Area, and then the Columbia River. So that's set to kick off with a workshop to do some planning, site selection methods, and bring on folks like EPA who have volunteered to do some of our field work for us, and then other partners that we're working on acquiring right now. And we were hoping to be sampling at the end, by the end of the next calendar year, ideally by next summer. And that'd be a 1-year push for an assessment of seasonal high, seasonal low, and flooding events for that broad spectrum of plastics.
Wow, fantastic. Yeah, that's definitely within the scope of this work group. Thanks for speaking up.
Yeah, cheers. Would love to, would love to come talk and provide more detail, especially as we're figuring stuff out and there's a real opportunity for feedback to make a difference. So thanks.
Cool. Thank you, Ben. Alrighty. Well, this has been a really fun meeting. I am so excited to see the amount of people that are interested. I think we have our biggest challenge right now is figuring out how to stay organized and best leverage the great minds, the many great minds that are interested in this work group.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Shelley, for taking the lead. I know it's the first meeting, and so it's certainly an opportunity to brainstorm. Thinking next steps, just based on past experience with the Trash Monitoring Working Group, potentially just based on the subtopics that you outlined and the future interests, as well as potential guest speakers within those sub-projects. Maybe the agenda can be organized by those subtopics, and that way we can do a deeper dive and actually maybe next meeting really construct more of an action around each of those items, just to continue that momentum, because I think it's an excellent starting point.
That's a great suggestion. Thanks, Caitlin.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll send out a doodle poll and a survey. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks
Bye.
all.
Thanks, everyone.